The next bill on the calendar for the day, Senate File 2904. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2904, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government, modify environment and natural resource laws, the unofficial engrossment.
To the author, the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, Senate File 2904 is a mid-session policy bill with a variety of provisions of environmental policy that we thought we could find fairly common agreement on. It does include a variety of technical corrections for the Board of Water and Soil Resources. Those were worked with the Minnesota Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts and the watershed districts. It has the first in the nation updating and modernizing of rough fish and changing the definitions of rough fish into native rough fish, showing that we have a value in those fish that have been here before for many, many eons and often had been considered junk fish or trash fish, and they all have value. They are valuable fish in our ecosystem. It has a provision on native prairies that we heard from Representative Ream earlier. It has, Representative Norris has a bill updating the Budget Oversight Committee. That is included. A Minnesota Pollution Control Agency bill for outreach with manure management. And then it has the statutory language for the electronic licensing. We heard Representative Greenman's bill for kind of the interim to use your phone. This will set up the system for electronic licensing. So with that, I would ask for your support for the bill.
There are amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Heinzman moves to amend Senate File number 2904, the unofficial engrossment. The amendment is coded A4.
To the author of the amendment, the member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the A3, thank you. The A4 members, try again. The A4 clarifies which waters Bowser has rulemaking authority for. My amendment specifically addresses what wetland replacement and public waters work permits apply to. Trout streams and natural and altered water courses with a total drainage area together approximately 2 square miles. I did reach out to Bowser on how to address my concerns on this rulemaking process, but I'm not convinced that it narrows the scope enough. However, it appears to be a little better than the original language. Thank you.
Discussion on the amendment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We would accept the A4 amendment.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. Oh, there was one that withdrew. The clerk will report the amendment.
Heinzman moves to amend Senate File number 2904, the unofficial engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A5.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. Even though we have achieved nearly 98% compliance on buffer bill language passed a number of years ago, here comes the heavy hand of government once again in this bill. My amendment, the A5, deletes authority for Bowser to revoke local jurisdiction of the buffer law and keeps local people working with their landowners rather than some bureaucrat at an agency in St. Paul. Thank you.
Further discussion to the amendment. To the member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, Will the author of the bill yield to a question?
He will yield to a question.
Okay,
Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would, if the author of the bill, there seems to be some confusion, if you could help me out there, Chair Hansen. The meaning in this new provision with jurisdiction, can you help clarify that? Madam Speaker, thank you.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Backer, do you have the page line number, just so I'm clear on what you're asking?
Representative Backer.
Yes, Madam Speaker, we are looking at line 6814, where it says with jurisdiction, means of a board determination that the county or watershed district has adopted and is implementing a rule. My concern there is it's just a little confusing. If you could, with jurisdiction, in that sense on line 6814, carried through line 6819, because that's where this is being changed. Can you clarify with jurisdiction, please? Thank you.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Backer. So, as you know, the jurisdiction with a county and a watershed district, they have the authority as a drainage authority. It can be a drainage authority, a county or a watershed district, and they also provide for the regulatory oversight. If you look on 68.15, prior to the existing language, it says that they can adopt a rule, ordinance, or official controls. We're now 9 years past the passage of the law. So what the added language is doing is is implementing. So, you know, there's a fairness question here of having local jurisdictions, and there may be landowners in differing jurisdictions, but the implementation is different. So you want to make sure that it's not just having the ordinance, the determination for that, but that they are implementing that jurisdiction. Does that make sense, Representative Backer?
Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So let me ask you this question, Chair Hansen. When this was set up in 2015, this was one of the first bills that we got thrown in a lot for myself at that time. We're talking about local control. With jurisdiction and with the changes on 68.17, 6818, and 6819, what happens is, and correct me if I'm wrong, what happens is we remove that local control and we put in the hands of a central bureaucracy, Bowser in this situation. Am I understanding that correct?
Representative Backer, are you asking Representative Hansen to yield?
I am. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will Chair Hansen yield, please?
Yes, he will. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So when you look at 68.17, 68.18, 61.9, that provides a method for that revocation of the determination. And why is that? Again, as I mentioned in the earlier colloquy, that there may be a local entity that is not doing implementation. They may have something on the books. So this actually provides a procedure for the Board of Water and Soil Resources to make sure that there's a process if they are revoking that authority. So you are correct. This would provide if there's, for example, nonfeasance, that you have the rule, but you are not implementing it, that they would provide that cover of responsibility so that it's treated fairly across local jurisdictions, and that the Board of Water and Soil Resources has that here.
Representative Backer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chair Hansen. And that is exactly why individuals in Greater Minnesota is so concerned about this, because what we heard, and I appreciate your answer there, Chair Hansen. What we heard, folks, is if the agency does not like what they're doing, For example, in my neck of the woods, in my area, we use no-till a lot as the means for buffer, because for those of you who aren't familiar with no-till, you have the roots that holds the soil a lot better when you're flat and you can see your stray dog 3 miles away walking, because that's where I live. I live on an area you can literally see a stray dog 3-4 miles away because we're so flat. So there are times that no-till makes more sense than a grass buffer. And that's what's so concerning about this heavy-handedness. If we have a bureaucrat at Bowser who says you have to use grass for your buffer instead of local control, we fought really hard in 2015 to have that local control, because what's in Representative Torkelson's district or Representative Heinzman's district is completely different than what is in the district I represent, which starts the Red River Valley and goes all the way up to Canada there. So that's my concern, Chair Hansen and members, is we are bringing the authority. We already have 98.5%, but this could be interpreted as if the Bowser does not like what they're doing, that the local soil water conservation district will be forced to follow their way. So what happens is that local watershed district becomes the bad cop, even though they have worked over the last 10 years to help change that, to get the landowners into compliance. And there could be a long discussion about that. And that's really what the challenge is you have a top-down approach instead of what's been working. So it doesn't make sense why we're giving a state agency who does not understand, who don't have the relationship with the landowners, that heavy-handedness. So members, I like Representative Heinzman's amendment. It makes sense. Folks, if you have 98.5%, who would not be in Las Vegas with those type of odds? Those are phenomenal odds. People have worked over the 10 years. If anybody was in a district like my district, this was very challenging for the landowners. There was no compensation. It's no different than building a road and saying, we're going to build a highway in the metro area, or let's say some tracks for a choo-choo train, okay, heading south. You guys, we would have to compensate for that land. I had constituents who worked with it. We had soil and water, our conservation district worked with them to find the best way to do it, because that's what the law allowed. Now that won't happen, because if Bowser doesn't like it, folks, boom, you got to change the land and or change what you're doing to prevent the erosion. Please understand, my constituents does not want land to be washed away in Lake Traverse or Big Stone Lake or up the Red River Valley. That means they're losing money. That's not a good business. So Representative Heinzman, thank you for this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion. The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, much has been said already. Representative Backer, you're spot on, and Representative Heinzman, thank you for the amendment. You know, 2015, as Representative Hansen mentioned, 9 years ago, and it was when the bill was passed, there was a lot of consternation about this. The entire buffer thing, it really made the importance of public waters come up to the top. Again, the compensation issue. And our local SWCDs did a very good job of working with landowners, and to have the compliance that we have today is pretty exemplary. And we heard discussion that this may be coming with Bowser trying to take over the implementation of these last few cases. And here it is today. We have it on the floor today. And again, in the interest of maintaining local control and letting the local offices work with the farmers to get these last few done, again, I would strongly encourage support for the Heinzman amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would oppose the Heinzman amendment. As has been mentioned, 9 years of implementation, and it is not fair to the 95+% who have come into compliance. It's not fair to them when the others don't. So I would ask you to defeat the Heinzman amendment.
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think I will just finish this discussion by asking for a roll call. Thank you.
Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk call the member who is voting remotely?
Keeler.
Keeler votes no.
Keeler votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 62 yeas and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 2904.
Third reading. Discussion. Representative Hansen.
Madam Speaker, I would defer to the questions that I think are coming.
To the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the author yield to a question?
The author will yield for a question.
I got to lean
Representative Nash.
I got to lean. There he is. Chair Hansen, a couple questions for you, and you and I had sort of talked about this before. I'm very curious about the hunting app as a hunter and somebody who has purchased a license for forever. I had some questions about it. Can you tell me a little bit about the company that you're using or that will be used to do this, since it's not you, but the state will be using for this, where the data is being stored, how copies of the data will be handled, some of those things along those lines, and I will have other questions.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Nash. We have had an outside vendor since 1999 providing the licensing for hunting and fishing licenses. This will be a different vendor. But the statutory requirements for data management, data practices, all that remain the same. It is the DNR's data. It will be stored by the DNR. It's under all of the existing data practices requirements. This vendor has done the similar service for Michigan, Arkansas, and Ohio. So we are not the test run on this. They've done it before, and I'm confident that we have those data practices protections. As you know, we've had issues in the past, and on a bipartisan basis, you know, we've strengthened those data practices to protect that data. Just, Madam Speaker, you know, having been here a while, when I first was elected, members could access hunting and fishing licenses and use that for campaign purposes. We stopped that. And we stopped that. We stopped and to make sure that we were protecting Social Security numbers and protecting driver's license numbers. So I think we've got pretty good belts and suspenders, be they orange or camouflage, to make sure that this is protected.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hansen. Because as members, as we know, I've said this before, we never forget a bad implementation or launch. So I'm grateful. I've used the Michigan when I go hunting in Michigan. One other question for the licensing part, Chair Hansen, is obviously there will be a loss of revenue for some people who sell the durable paper licenses. And I'm thinking particularly for those like a local hardware store or maybe up and around the resort range. That's going to create a fairly sizable loss for them. Have you thought about increasing what they would normally get? I think they get paid $1 right now. Have you thought about offsetting that by increasing what they will continue to be able to sell for those that choose to do the paper license?
Representative Nash, are you asking? Representative Hansen will yield for the question. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Nash. I have not thought about that.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I'm an ideas guy, Chair Hansen, as you know. I think that's going to be measurable, particularly for people who are up in the resort range. I know that friends of mine who had a hardware store that use that, they don't make a lot, but sometimes it offsets things that they do for their employees. It might actually create a little bit of the salary for the person who might be doing that. So I do think, I'm going to move this way a little bit so we can, since we're not the Senate, thank God for that. But I think there's an argument to be made for finding a way to offset some of that lost revenue for those folks who do this at a bait shop, or for those that do that at gas stations. I got you there, Representative Joy, or for people who do it at resorts. So if you would, please do think about that moving forward. One of the things that I noticed, and Chair Hansen, you and I have probably spent equal amount of time in the deer woods, and you know that sometimes you don't have access to a good, strong cell signal. So one of the questions that I have, and this may be deep in the weeds and might be referred to the vendor, but is there a local copy of my license that's going to be saved on my phone so that I could pull it up as an image? Have we made sure that those are in the requisites that we're giving to the vendor to make sure, if he would yield, I would appreciate an answer to that, Madam Chair, because if you don't have cell coverage, and that's the best part of the state sometimes to go hunting, is the place that has no cell coverage. And I think that would be a really good thing to consider, to give to them as a requirement, to say, hey, think about the fact that in some of the best hunting places in the state, there is no cell coverage reliably, and yet a game warden may come and find you and want to see a copy of your license, if he would yield. Representative
Hansen will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and that may be a endorsement for Representative Greenman's bill, because what I would do is just take a screenshot of the photo on the app, and that would be accessible there. That would be, just off the top of my head, what I would think I would do, is to make sure I've got that copy in my phone, in my photo section. So,
Representative Nash.
And last question, if he would yield, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker. Oh, I never do that, Madam Speaker. And maybe this is for staff or somebody in the department, but I'm very concerned also about where this data is being stored, whether it's on a state of Minnesota minute server, I'll move this way, or if it's going to be in the cloud. Because as I passed a bill a couple years ago that created the cloud first, I want to make sure that we're looking at a cloud source provision so that if in the event of something bad happening to a server, it would immediately fail over to another server that's striped somewhere around the world, if he would yield.
Representative Hansen will yield. Representative Hansen.
thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Nash, I'd be happy to work with you and the department to answer those technical questions.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman. The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I had just a couple of questions for the bill's author, if he would yield.
He will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hansen, I wasn't sure on one of the questions that Representative Nash asked about having the photo of the license on your phone. If a game warden stops you and that's all that you can show them, will that suffice? Or will he be ticketed if he can't show his actual license?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If Representative Greenman's bill becomes law and there's the photo of the license, a screenshot of that license, that would suffice, because they're able to read the number on the DNR license, the number that you have, and then the number for the license would be readable if you have a screenshot of the license. So sounds like I see Representative Greenman's on the floor. It's another endorsement for what we passed last week, and I believe the Senate is taking up next week.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Hansen, I do have a question. So I don't know, I don't sit on the environment committees. I kind of wish this bill would have come to the Judiciary and Civil Law so we could kind of parse it out. I know you said it's just a continuation of what the DNR does now, but digitally. But anytime that happens, something is digitized, that gives me concern. So help me understand how this works. So a game warden is out there. They want to verify Jim Nash's hunting or fishing license. Do they have a scanner that they go up and they scan his digitized license? How does that work? If you could yield and answer that question.
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Madam Speaker and Representative Scott, my understanding is that that will be part of the system in the future, that they would be able to scan that.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for that, Representative Hansen. If you would yield to another question.
He will yield.
Thank you. Representative Hansen, will that scanner also pick up a geolocation? So it'll pick up that Representative Nash is in Crow Wing County and give the coordinates to that? Will that be also recorded?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Scott. I do not know the answer to that right now. I do know that when we've been doing some of the CWD recording and reporting, that you'd actually be able to geolocate yourself where you're at. So I think with the technology there, it'll be there, but I can't answer definitively to you on that particular question at this moment.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Hansen. Again, I wish this would have come to our committee so that we could have asked these really important questions. So my concern, of course, is that, you know, nobody's going to have a secret fishing hole anymore. If the DNR is you know, geolocating and running a license everywhere a particular person goes, and furthermore, that may make a lot of people really uncomfortable that the DNR knows everywhere that they've gone by checking their license and scanning the license. And would Representative Hansen yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so, you know, DNR conservation officers are considered, I'm assuming they're considered law enforcement. So what are the parameters on this bill as far as sharing the data that is obtained through this app, especially the location and that sort of thing when a DNR officer, you know, scans a license? What are the parameters for sharing that data with other law enforcement, including federal?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's my understanding it's the same as current law.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Hansen, thank you for answering these questions. I am very interested in some of the answers that you didn't know, especially the geolocation. And so I'm assuming someone from the DNR is listening, and if so, if they could get to me with some answers, that would be really helpful. Thank you for the line of questioning.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the author yield?
The author will yield. Representative Quam.
What is current law? That was your response to the previous question. I just would like the people watching to understand.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There is nothing in the bill that changes any of the requirements relating to data practices. I would defer to either the Judiciary Chair if she would like to answer that particular question.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, frankly, if we're going to do something that would have a change, we ought to know the ramifications across all the aspects. So I understand the reference, but a lot of people watching and interacting and interested in fishing, hunting, etc., might not have been listening to the other committees and know the current law, so that would have been nice. What also would have been nice is, do we really want people to be able to hunt us down because we've got an app that can find out where we're at? And, you know, I think that's somewhat concerning. In fact, when you load it, there should be listed These are the things that happen when you load and use this. That disclaimer should be made. It's convenient, but we often talk about the apps we load for business and pleasure and et cetera, hobbies and et cetera, that we have to be cautious about some of the aspects of those apps. So if we're going to implement something, we should know what that's going to be like before we implement it, instead of we'll find that out once we do it. So that's some of the ill at ease that I have on this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Travers, Representative Backer.
Madam Speaker, will the author yield to a few questions?
He will yield. Representative Backer.
Okay. Chair, my first question goes to line 43.2. And my question for that on line 43.2, Chair Hansen, is how I read that language, it means that any addition to the drainage manual will have the same effect as statute 103.e, therefore bypassing this body and the other body across the other body in the Capitol. That is how I understand it when I read that. If you could have clarification. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the 43.2 is the fish packer provision. Are you talking about 43.20? Okay. And the drainage stakeholder coordination, so that's Article 3, and we're amending the drainage work the drainage stakeholder coordination, the Board of Water and Resources will work with stakeholders and updating the drainage law and the Minnesota Public Drainage Manual as well. So for the purpose of this subdivision, the Public Drainage Manual is a publication that is prepared and adopted by the board and includes explanations, procedures, and guidance consistent with and supplementing the provisions of Chapter 103E. That's your question? That's fairly straightforward.
Representative Backer. And members, when you ask questions, be specific about what you're asking for clarification and just not a general clarification and language that is plain in front of us. So Representative Backer.
Yeah, thank you. And that's exactly the concern that is, if I read this correctly, the language means that any addition to that drainage manual by the board, Bowser, therefore, they can make changes without going through this body and this body in the Senate. So that's why I bring that up, because again, it takes away local control. It takes away that local control back in our districts. On this bill here, my next question I have for Chair Hansen, if Chair Hansen, you would yield, please.
He will yield for a question. Representative Backer.
Okay, I am on 88.14, so we can reference that, please, 88.14. And 88.15. It talks about provisions that protect or migrate impacts to public values of water courses that are not public waters. My question would be could you define, Mr. Chair, if you would yield to the question, what is a water course? If you could yield to that question, please.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Backer. This is the provision that we just amended with the Heinzman Amendment. So it provided that clarity of intermittent perennial water courses upstream with public waters. So you would have intermittent streams, perennial water courses are those consistent and flowing. So there's two types. Those are those water courses that go dry, those are intermittent streams, and then there are those perennial water courses upstream of public water course. That's as we just adopted the amendment from Representative Heinzman.
Representative Packer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Chair. Couple things about this bill that concerns me. I already talked about the great concern with the buffer. Also, if we look under 67.21 and 67.2, I find it interesting that we are moving that date, which is expired on July 31st of 2024 to July of 29. I understand that no watershed authority has used that pilot at all. Even the few counties that insisted on using that 5 years ago has not used it. And the concern that we have about this, that I have heard, is this concept that is under section 6721 and 6722 is really the exact opposite of the traditional viewing process that has been used over the last 100 years. And so even though no one has used it, we're extending this for another 5 years. And it's one of those provisions, folks, that's just not used. Why are we extending something that has not been used? Of course, the buffer is a big concern. Even though Chair Hansen said there's only some changes to it, out in west central Minnesota, it can have significant impact. With the biggest, what we're doing is we're bringing local control, taking local control away from our soil water conservation districts and moving it to St. Paul. And St. Paul does not have a good tradition of knowing how to take care of things. So I would ask to vote against this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The member from Clay, Representative Joy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And will the author yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Joy.
So currently today, when I sell hunting and fishing licenses through my gas station, which, you know, many people stop on their way from Fargo-Moorhead to Detroit Lakes and buy a hunting and fishing license from me. It's actually one of the businesses I really look forward to because we sell tackle and everything. With this new electronic license systems going in place, I feel you're taking tools out of our toolbox as retailers. You know, you're telling us that it's going to go online. So one of my questions, I guess, for the bill author over there is, right now, if a husband comes in during fishing opener and it's too cold so the wife doesn't go with, and he wants to buy combination fishing license for his family, when I sell that license, I have to now, starting last year, because of the state of Minnesota and the DNR, I have to issue him a ticket for his wife to bring in because I need to validate her driver's license and scan it in order to get her license. So my question is going to be, how will this operate that way to verify the person's in the house or next to the spouse in the car? Or how are we going to verify this in this new ELS system?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Joy. Similar to, let's back up for a moment. The world is changing, and we've moved away from paper a while ago. If we talk to our children or our grandchildren, they would much rather be purchasing on this. Maybe some of us here would rather be doing that as well. So this is going to continue to change, and people are going to be buying things. And we're able to do this with e-commerce. We're able to do that. We have, each of us, a Minnesota DNR number if we've bought a fishing license or a hunting license before. We also often have driver's licenses or an ID number. So there are ways to validate that on getting that license. This discussion has occurred almost with every business and with every range of government in terms of how do we get things. And that validation is going to be there. So if you're stopped and you have that and you are not who you say you are, that's a different situation. But you're attesting that you are who you are when you're buying that, just like you're attesting that it's your credit card when you are making that purchase. The world is changing, it's going to continue to change, and more people are going to want to do it, making sure that they're buying their license here than having to stop at a site and save that time.
Representative Joy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That was a real long, roundabout question. I guess my question was more focused is with, when the husband's standing in my store and I can see him in person and I verify and I print out his hunting license, we get a slip for his wife. He cannot purchase that, even if he has her social security number, her driver's license, or everything to verify that's his wife, unless she is standing physically in my station. So I don't know how this, just by having somebody's ID number or somebody's social security number or some DNR number, will verify it. How are we going to get to that? That's my question, if he will yield for that question.
He will yield for the question. Representative Hansen.
I would refer to my previous answer. I mean, it's kind of the way we are in 2024. You are able to validate, you are signing in, you're logging in, just like when you're buying something or buying something else.
Representative Joy.
I guess that's not really the answer I was looking for, so we're looking more at straw purchasing is what I'll call this, because we're not having verification here. That's how I look at this. The state has changed this so that I verify that people are buying hunting and fishing licenses combination for the husband and the wife and making sure that we're verifying it. That's just what we do in Minnesota, is we verify to make sure it's the person. But apparently, I guess we're moving to online, and it's easier to verify somehow we're doing this. What I'm hoping is when we continue with this is, are we going to save money in the state of Minnesota because we're having less of these license machines? Because my station makes a very, very good amount of money on selling licenses and coming with bags of jerky or different things with this. You know, I mean, when people stop from North Dakota and they're coming into our area, they probably bought gas in North Dakota because it's cheaper over there with the road tax and everything. But they're stopping at my station to pick up their Minnesota fishing license, which can be $158 or they're expensive. But they're coming to us as they're heading to their lake cabin. On their way, they're stopping to pick up groceries and everything with us. It's gonna financially hurt me when we go to this. But I also think the checks and balances we put in place are gonna go away. We'll be buying licenses for whoever we want. So when we're deer hunting, we'll be buying deer licenses for our wife when she's not there because we shot an extra deer. How will this work? Is there gonna be an hour rule? I don't know how we're gonna verify this. This is how the state of Minnesota is gonna, I guess, go down this new technology as we're being told. I think this is, I think this needs to be changed. I think this is bad. It's gonna hurt small businesses. Thank you.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. And Representative Hansen, I would agree, I think we'd all agree that, yeah, the world is changing. This is 2024. But not everybody is changing along with it. We have a lot of older folks that we owe the ability to let them hunt and fish. And if they like an old paper fishing license, I think we need to make sure that they can still get it that way. An example, my brother is an avid hunter and fisherman, and he has a cell phone, but it's an old flip phone. There's no way he can't take pictures with it. He can't upload anything. You know, it just wouldn't work for somebody like him, and I think a lot of people as well. And good questions raised about the impact this is going to have on our local gas stations and bait shops. You know, for years, local bait shop has been the face of the DNR. You stop in and get a license and say, hey, I'm going to be hunting right out here. What zone is that in? And the bait shop guy will tell you, you're in 471 or whatever. So it's a service. And at least for fishing licenses, they get a whole $1. They get $1 for issuing that license. And we used to say that if you have a good idea and $1, you could buy a cup of coffee. But that ain't the way it is today. And $1 service fee for a fishing license or whatever, maybe that should be looked at as well if we look at this whole issue. I have a guy that contacted me. He's on the border out in Ortonville. And again, talking about the $1 fee for issuing a license. In a neighboring South Dakota, he said the fee is $4 that they get out there for issuing that license. So as we move ahead into this electronic age in 2024, let's not forget where we were. Let's not forget the folks that still like the old paper copy and don't have the ability to buy and get these things online. And let's go cautious as we move ahead with these licensing provisions with Minnesota hunting and fishing.
Any further discussion? Further discussion? To the member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm ready to give my comments on the bill now. Members, most of this bill is, I think, arguably a technical snoozer of sorts. There's a lot here that is very much in the weeds, affecting Bowser and affecting watershed districts and a lot of other small changes to state statute. And there's an amount of it that arguably is overdue. Some of the other provisions we've been discussing over the last few minutes are a little bit more concerning or a little more interesting. Some of the Game and Fish Oversight Committee modifications, feral hog definition changes, the rough fish designation. But most are probably not, at least those in the public who may be trying to sort through the discussion, sort through the debate, are probably not really tracking the problematic sections unless you're really looking for them. They're easy to miss. And I suppose that's a positive and a negative. In a previous life, I was a watershed district manager, so those are some things that popped off the page for me, things that I was interested in to see what the potential impact might be to watershed districts. And quite honestly, Representative Hansen, I had a lot of questions prepared, but I think that I'll save those for another day. I think most of what's going on here is going to be relatively neutral in its effect. I want to thank the majority for allowing the A4 to go on. I think that amendment will at least help some of those that had concerns on some of the new rulemaking process. We're not there yet. I hope that that provision goes away entirely for Bowser. There's just so many questions that we have and how that may impact here in Minnesota, so I hope that there's an opportunity there. I think on just conclusion, I'll point out, and this is kind of going back to the discussion around the A4, I still remain unconvinced. I feel like the background there for people, if they want to do a little Googling on their own, and it might have come out in a more robust discussion, would be a reference to a Supreme Court case. And that case was Sackett versus EPA. There was a piece of ground that had been deemed by local folks to not be buildable, that it was in a wetland when clearly it was not, at least in the opinion of the Supreme Court. And that's affecting this discussion here today on the floor. It's affecting the rulemaking process that Bowser is wanting to proceed and continue towards. Thankfully, in that particular case, I believe the United States Supreme Court sided with local landowners, with those are advocating for property rights. I doubt passing the provisions in Section 83 of this bill are the answer, and it's for that reason that I will be voting no on the bill today. Like I've said a couple of times, I do hope that potentially that's a section that could be addressed. The other section I wanted to quickly mention is a section that potentially may impact specifically watershed districts and how they remove members from their boards. And there is a couple of, I think, very good key pieces in that language identifying malfeasance and other obvious reasons for somebody to be removed from a board. But I hope that that language actually accomplishes the goal that I think people have in mind. I hope that it doesn't become a tool to remove those with a dissenting opinion. That is something that we're always trying to be mindful of here, that those with a different opinion are protected and not targeted by the language that is being potentially passed into law. Madam Speaker, I'm going to leave it there, but I hope that members would join me in opposing this bill. I think that we have an opportunity to do some better work before the end of session.
To the author of the bill, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Heinzman, just to the last point, I want to make sure as the author of the bill to provide my intent that the watershed district on the removal is relating to nonfeasance, misfeasance, and malfeasance rather than dissent. That I think it's a great power to be able to remove someone who has been appointed to a position, and it should be for the nonfeasance, misfeasance, malfeasance. That is my intent. I would hope you would reconsider and support the bill. It is a good bill. As I mentioned in the introduction, the native fish, the rough fish, is really long overdue, 100 years that we have been classifying things as junk or trash that are living beings that are part of our ecosystem. So for that reason alone, I would encourage a yes vote. The licensing provision, it is 2024. People are asking for these changes. They want the update. They want to be able to move in the 21st century. The provisions on native prairies we didn't talk much about, but they're very helpful. Modernizing and streamlining the Budget Oversight Committee, very helpful. The Bowser provisions, although they may be a little bit dry, I guess, for the Board of Water and Soil Resources, they are important. And that's why the Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts and the watershed districts worked with those to try to update those provisions. It's not that exciting, but it is very important. And so I would ask for a yes vote for the bill.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk call the name of the member voting remotely?
Keeler.
Keeler votes aye.
Keeler votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 72 yeas and 58 nays, the bill is passed as amended and it's titled agreed to.